Hey everyone, it's Jaeyoung here, and welcome to the Overwatch Patch 1.31 overview. As usual, the link to the rundown video is down in the description below. Anyway, this is a pretty lengthy patch, let's get to it. McCree's Peacekeeper has received a buff, upping the damage of his Fan the Hammer from 45 to 55 damage a shot. Taking into account the fully loaded gun, this ups the total damage of it from 270 to 330 damage. Depending on your playstyle, this could prove quite useful in certain situations, because after a target is stunned by a flashbang for 0.7 seconds, players can choose to either Fan the Hammer or try going for the double hit shot. McCree fires around 2 shots a second with his primary fire, so a double hit shot is totally doable, putting out a hefty 280 damage as opposed to Fan the Hammer's ult damage of 270. The persistent issue of this is whether the player can hit their shots accurately enough, because no matter how good you are, you're going to miss sometimes. Unless, you know, you're like Calvin or something. So it really came down to deciding on whether relying on your own accuracy or your ammo management was better for yourself. Now, if you're the kind of person who prefers Fan the Hammer instead of normal shots after a flashbang, this doesn't really change his damage breakpoints by that much. Almost any squishy you could have killed before will obviously still die, but as far as the tanks go, you're pretty much just dealing an additional 60 damage. In fact, the only hero that is solidly affected by the new flashbang Fan the Hammer combo is probably Bastion in its recon form. However, another hero who might experience a bit of a change against this would be Doomfist. Due to his passive, Doomfist can come flying in with up to 400 HP at his disposal, so this buff will help more effectively chunk down his health. His nerfs, which I will talk about in a moment, will also make him far more manageable a threat. So these situations are pretty specific, and it's easy to nitpick on whether it'll ultimately be a big change, but as I always say, a buff's a buff, and giving McCree a bit more finishing power to confirm kills is great. Also, regardless if you 2-tap or Fan the Hammer, don't forget to throw in a good punch in there if you can. Moving on, Bastion accompanies McCree in this patch cycle, receiving a buff to its Recon mode ammo capacity as well as its Sentry mode weapon spread. While in Recon mode, its maximum ammo capacity has been increased from 25 to 35. Not much to say about the buff other than it's very much one of convenience, allowing you to output a little bit more damage, whether it's while chasing down a weak target or shooting while repositioning your Sentry form. Ideally, you won't be spending most of your combat time in Recon form, but this at least gives you a bit more power if you are. The other buff is far more interesting in my opinion, and it's that while in Sentry form, Bastion's weapon spread decreases up to a third while firing. Note that I say it decreases, not decreased. So what happens now is that while Bastion's Gatling gun is firing, its spread will decrease as it happens. At medium to close range, this change isn't really that big, but it's a significant one if you're playing from longer ranges. Bastion is traditionally played for its unmatched raw damage that can easily burst through barriers and absolutely mow down unprotected targets with ease. Since barriers are usually the first line of defense Bastion has to destroy, this allows players to start decreasing your spread while taking down the barrier. And once the barrier is broken, you'll have a much healthier spread size that will allow you to more easily focus down enemies. So that's a pretty neat change in my opinion. Moving on, the final hero to receive a buff this patch is Torbjorn, who has his Molten Core damage increased from 130 to 160 damage per second. Since there wasn't a change stated about the damage it does to armor, I assume it's still the same at 190 damage, with only the base damage being raised to 160. Torbjorn's Molten Core is probably one of the more underwhelming ultimate abilities in the game. It can be pretty devastating when combined with, say, a Graviton Surge, but you could say the same for most other ultimates. On paper, it reads as a pretty powerful ultimate ability in terms of its raw damage and utility as a zoning ability, right? You know, you have the ability to shut off a passageway, forcing enemies into a disadvantaged position, or forcing them back and away. But as time went along after his rework, it turned out that wasn't really the case, was it? With each magma pool lasting 10 seconds, it's kinda hard to properly utilize the ability. Like, you can't really preemptively shut off a choke because all your enemies have to do is wait out the ability for a few seconds. And you could kinda try to catch them as they're walking in, but with the amount of mobility and sustain in the game, particularly in this meta, it's gonna be real hard to secure kills out of that. So this buff attempts to at least decrease the window of opportunity enemies have to get out of the magma pool. Personally, I would have liked to see them reduce the damage off the ultimate and give it a slight slow effect, but we all know how obnoxious Mei can be, and at that point you might as well just play Mei for her Blizzard. Anyway, that's it for the buffs, let's move on to the nerfs. Brigitte's shield bash damage has been heavily nerfed from 50 damage all the way down to 5 damage and now no longer goes through barriers. Okay, so we're talking in terms of nerfs, right? This is pretty up there as a big one with a 90% damage reduction and removal of a powerful utility. The previous iteration of shield bash kind of completely removed the Reinhardt Earthshatter mind game. You know, that part of the game where two Reinhardts are holding their barriers in front of each other, both looking for a key moment in Earthshatter. With shield bash, it became less about mind games and more about which team better communicated their bash shatter combos. And as we've seen at the higher levels of Overwatch esports, it eventually evolved into a mind game between Zaryas and Brigitte's, with the former saving their barriers to try and mitigate potential bash shatter combos.
The break stun's perfect. Watch, kick comes in, break stun, Perfect, perfect. Bubble. That fucking bubble timing. That fucking bubble, dude. You fucking kidding me, Carpe? We would have won off that.
So, with Shield Bash not being able to go through barriers anymore, teams will probably be dancing around their Reinhardt's barriers for even longer now. But it does at least somewhat revert to a mind game battle between two Reinhardt players. And as someone who plays quite a fair bit of Reinhardt, nice. Additionally, with her shield bash damage being reduced from 50 to 5 damage, it eliminates her ability to one-shot Tracer. Okay, it's not exactly a one-shot, it's a combo, but you guys know what I mean. I made a more in-depth video previously discussing this change and damage breakpoints, so I encourage you to check it out. The link will be in the description down below. But basically, this lowers her ult Tracer one-shot combo from 155 damage down to 110 damage. She's still going to be a good Tracer deterrent, but it's going to be way harder to third-person peek her on corners to surprise kill them. And she's still going to be a very powerful 1v1 duelist, but this reduction in her burst damage gives enemy players a little bit more time to deal with her or run away. The other change to her is actually a bit of a buff. Her Inspire passive has been changed, with its cooldown reduced from 1.5 down to 1 second, duration increased from 5 to 6 seconds, and total healing increased from 80 to 100 healing. Now, initially I thought this was a huge buff to her healing, but then I thought about it in terms of how the healing is distributed. So previously, she healed 80 health over 5 seconds, which ends up being 16 health a second. Currently, she heals 100 health over 6 seconds, which ends up being 16.67 health a second, which is just slightly more than Lucio's 16.25 health a second. So there really isn't that big of a difference for her healing other than being able to heal 20 more health over the entire duration. But due to the better potential uptime for her passive, she now has a better chance of healing allies who weren't initially within the radius of her aura or were constantly dancing in and out of it during battle. So these two changes try to reconfigure her to be more of a support hero rather than a support hero who is also pretty good as a DPS. I don't think it'll change how often she's picked, especially on ladder, because she's just so useful to have on a team, but nerfing her burst damage is a pretty decent change. And speaking of ladder, one of the biggest ladder stompers, especially in the higher ranks, Doomfist, has received some pretty hefty nerfs this patch. I usually try to remain impartial in my videos, but as someone who plays a lot of support and tanks, nice. His Rising Uppercut, Seismic Slam, and Meteor Strike have all been nerfed. For his Rising Uppercut, the target's loss of air control duration has been lowered from 3 to 0.6 seconds. So this is like a pretty big nerf, right? It used to be if you were knocked out by the uppercut, you'd pretty much be locked in place, making your head a pretty easy target for Doomfist to fire a few hand cannon shots into. Additionally, targets also no longer lose air control when hit by his Seismic Slam. How it used to work if you're hit by the slam was that you'd be knocked up slightly and towards Doomfist, who would be waiting with a fully loaded hand cannon to fill a skull with, right? So similar to Rising Uppercut, you now instead retain full air control of your hero, which obviously is great. The maximum range of Seismic Slam has also been reduced from 20 meters down to 15 meters. The range reduction is a pretty big nerf since it impacts Doomfist's mobility, which is a significant part of his kit, as well as his offensive potential. With 5 meters being removed from his mobility combos, Doomfist players will have to test out just how badly this will affect their rollouts, especially around pits. More than anything, those two abilities were extremely frustrating to play against, as if you were a squishy hero, you'd probably be deleted super fast. And if you were a tank, well, hope you like being a ping pong ball. These changes absolutely give targets much more counterplay in terms of movement rather than just being frozen in place midair. As for Doomfist players, if you were good at aiming anyway, you'll probably be able to adjust to this change accordingly. It might take a while to get used to, but it's totally doable. However, if you aren't that great at aiming and relied a lot on your targets being locked in midair, you're just going to have to practice. Lastly, his Meteor Strike has also been changed, with the inner ring damage radius increasing from 1.5 to 2 meters. But the damage outside of the inner ring decreased from 300 to 200 damage. This is overall definitely a nerf to the ability, even though the inner ring is slightly larger. I think it's a pretty healthy nerf due to how powerful the ability is against low mobility heroes. Having an advantage against heroes with low mobility as a highly mobile hero is fine, but Meteor Strike was pretty much a free delete button onto squishy heroes like Ana and Zenyatta. Even if they managed to juke out the old Meteor Strike's inner ring, they would almost always still die from the outer ring damage anyway. So this change offers much more counterplay from being one-shot. Successful Meteor Strikes that manage to get their targets within the inner ring for maximum damage will feel much more deserved. Doomfist is a really powerful ladder stomper, and in my opinion, one of those heroes you could absolutely hard carry on. In proper professional organized play, he isn't as effective due to teams being able to coordinate well together. But on a ladder environment where team coordination is absolutely nothing in comparison, he was an extremely strong pick. These changes are definitely going to cut down that ladder stomping potential he had before. Okay, the last change for this patch is to Soldier 76. His tactical visor no longer makes Helix rockets auto-target enemies. So this is either a buff or a nerf, depending on how you look look at it. Personally, for me, I consider it a buff because I'd rather lead my Helix rockets rather than let the visor target it for me. There's still a misconception that the visor literally turns the rockets into a homing one, which is simply not true. Yes, tactical visor did help you aim your rocket, but it will launch it towards where your locked on target was at the time of firing. So if your target's moving around, as they probably will be when under fire by visor, chances are your rocket won't be able to hit them. Hence why having control over the Helix rocket, whether to lead the shot or target someone else, seems much more useful to me. But like I said, your mileage may vary depending on how you play. Some people would prefer having it targeted for them, some people don't. It really depends. And of course, we have our annual Winter Wonderland event returning this year. Nothing to say but happy Winter Wonderland to all, and have a very happy new year. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this, feel free to leave a like, subscribe if you want to. I have a Patreon set up right now, link is in the description down below. Anyway, take care everyone.